The dental trap. Dr. Gerald Cranston adjusted the rearview mirror of his modest Toyota Camry, a car that had seen better days but suited his side gig as an Uber driver. It was 11:47 p.m. on a Wednesday, and the streets of the city were quiet, save for the occasional buzz of neon lights and the hum of passing cars. Dr. Cranston preferred the late-night shift. It was when people were tired, less guarded, and more likely to engage in small talk, the kind that could reveal the perfect opportunity. What most of his passengers didn't know, what no one in the city suspected, was that Dr. Cranston wasn't just any Uber driver. By day, he was a successful dentist with a pristine reputation. By night, however, his Uber routes were carefully curated expeditions. He wasn't just driving to earn extra cash, he was hunting for something or someone. As the app pinged, signaling his next pickup, Dr. Cranston felt the familiar flutter of anticipation in his chest. Tonight's passengers could be anyone. A college student coming home from a late-night study session, a business executive unwinding after an endless day, or maybe, just maybe, the perfect candidate for his extracurricular endeavors. He pulled up to a dimly lit curb where a young woman stood, her face illuminated by the glow of her phone screen. She looked up, her expression briefly wary before softening. She opened the car door and slid into the back seat. "Hi, Gerald, right?" she asked, glancing at the app. "Yes, that's me. And you must be Tina?" he replied with a friendly smile. He always smiled. It disarmed people. The small talk began as expected. "How's your night going? Busy out there tonight?" But as the conversation deepened, Dr. Cranston's mind worked behind the scenes, piecing together subtle details. Her job, her routines, her relationships, or lack thereof. Each detail was a potential thread to pull. By the time Tina's ride ended, Cranston had cataloged her into his mental Rolodex of potential candidates. Not quite what he was looking for, but perhaps useful later. He parked at a gas station to clean the smudges from his rearview mirror, his ritual before the next hunt. The next ping came in, this time for a pickup in a wealthier part of town. A man in a tailored suit, talking loudly on his Bluetooth headset, entered the car. Cranston smiled to himself. People like this were always the most oblivious to danger. They believed nothing bad could happen to them. The trap was set, but Cranston knew better than to rush. He'd spent years perfecting the art of patience, a skill honed both in dentistry and in his hidden life. What his passengers never realized was that by the time they left his car, he'd already chosen whether they were prey or just another face in the night. Dr. Cranston pulled away from the brownstone, his mind humming with the possibilities. Passenger 47 had been a good find, a potential trophy if the man's life unraveled the way Cranston suspected it might. But patience was key. Cranston didn't rush. He didn't fumble his plans with recklessness. His method had always been about control, precision, and timing, qualities that made him a respected dentist and, in another life, a master of the perfect hunt. As the city's lights blurred past, the Uber app pinged again. The destination was a quieter part of town, near the industrial district. Cranston smiled. Late-night pickups in that area usually meant someone trying to disappear or hide in plain sight. Either way, it was worth investigating. The pickup spot was a shadowy corner outside a nondescript bar. A woman emerged from the alley, cigarette in hand, her eyes darting nervously around before landing on the Camry. She climbed in quickly, her faded leather jacket squeaking against the seat as she adjusted herself. "You Carly?" Cranston asked, glancing at the app for confirmation. "Yeah," she muttered, barely meeting his gaze. Her voice was rough, as though she'd spent the night shouting or crying. Cranston couldn't tell which yet. He didn't push for small talk right away. Carly was a different kind of passenger. The way she hunched into herself, arms crossed defensively, told him she wasn't looking for conversation. But he had his ways. "You from around here?" he asked after a few blocks of silence, his tone casual. Carly snorted. "Does it matter?" Cranston grinned. "Not really, just trying to make the ride less awkward." She didn't respond, her gaze fixed out the window. But she wasn't as disinterested as she appeared. He caught her stealing glances at the rearview mirror, her eyes lingering on him longer than they should. It wasn't suspicion exactly, more like curiosity. Long night. He tried again, his voice warm and inviting. She sighed, finally relenting. You could say that. Some people don't know when to leave well enough alone. Cranston's fingers tightened slightly on the steering wheel, though his expression remained calm. I know what you mean. Sometimes people just don't let go. Carly's eyes snapped to his, her expression unreadable. She shifted in her seat, angling herself slightly toward him. What do you know about that? Cranston chuckled. Oh, more than you'd think. People talk to me a lot in this job. You'd be amazed at what they'll tell a stranger. Carly smirked, but it didn't reach her eyes. Yeah, well, maybe people should keep their mouths shut more often. Cranston tilted his head, intrigued. She was defensive, sure, but there was something else. Something simmering beneath the surface. He decided to push just a little further. Sometimes it's better to share, he said. Carrying secrets can be exhausting. Carly looked at him sharply, her lips pressing into a thin line. For a moment, he thought he might have overstepped, but then she leaned back and laughed. A dry, humorless sound. You're not wrong, she admitted, shaking her head. But some secrets? They'll kill you faster if you let them out. Cranston's pulse quickened. He knew the type. Carly was someone who had done something, or had something done to her, that she couldn't let go of. The weight of it was written all over her face, in the nervous tap of her fingers against her thigh, in the way her eyes darted to the door locks every few seconds. Sounds like you've got a story to tell, he said, keeping his tone light. But don't worry, I'm a good listener. She didn't answer, but the way her shoulders relaxed told him he'd made progress. By the time he dropped her off at a rundown apartment complex, Cranston had learned a few key details. Her name probably wasn't Carly. She was lying low for reasons she didn't share. And most importantly, she was afraid of someone or something. As she climbed out of the car, Cranston noticed she left behind a folded piece of paper on the seat. He waited until she was safely inside her building before picking it up. The paper was creased and slightly damp, as though it had been in her pocket for hours. Written in rushed, uneven handwriting was a single sentence. They're watching. Don't trust anyone. Cranston stared at the note, a slow smile spreading across his face. Carly wasn't just a passenger. She was a potential catalyst. Someone whose secrets could unravel into something far bigger than either of them. He added her to the notebook under passenger 48 and noted her cryptic warning. Maybe it was paranoia. Or maybe it was the beginning of something much more interesting. Dr. Cranston stared at the note Carly had left behind, turning it over in his hands as if it might reveal more secrets. They're watching. Don't trust anyone. He couldn't help but wonder if Carly had intentionally left it, or if it was an accident. Either way, she'd just become far more interesting than a typical passenger. He added her to his mental web, weaving the strands of her story into his carefully curated network of lies, secrets, and control. He couldn't shake the sense that Carly's warning wasn't just paranoia. It felt pointed, deliberate, and dangerous. A week later, Cranston hadn't seen Carly since that night, but she lingered in his mind like an itch he couldn't scratch. He'd driven past her apartment a few times, watching for signs of life. She was careful, rarely leaving, and when she did, she moved like someone who was constantly looking over her shoulder. Late one evening, just as he was finishing a long shift, his Uber app pinged. The name was different, Clara, but the pickup location was unmistakable. It was Carly's building. He accepted the ride instantly. When she slid into the back seat, she didn't seem surprised to see him. In fact, she met his gaze in the rearview mirror with a knowing look. Small world, she said, her voice steady but guarded. Cranston smiled. Or a predictable one. She didn't respond, her gaze flickering out the window. This time, she carried a small duffel bag, her knuckles white as she gripped the strap. Heading somewhere new? Cranston asked casually as he started the car. Carly hesitated before replying. Just needed a change of scenery. He could tell she was lying, but he didn't push. The air between them was thick with unspoken tension, and Cranston relished the challenge of unraveling her. The turn. The drive was uneventful until Carly's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and stiffened, her entire demeanor shifting from guarded to panicked. "Pull over," she said abruptly. Cranston raised an eyebrow but obeyed, steering the car to the side of a deserted road. Carly shoved the door open and stepped out, pacing in the dim glow of the streetlights. Cranston rolled down the window. "Everything okay?" She didn't answer, muttering to herself as she glanced up and down the street. Finally, she turned back to the car and leaned into the open window. "Listen," she said, her voice low. "I know this is going to sound crazy, but I think someone's following me. I don't know who they are, but they've been watching me for weeks. She stopped, shaking her head. "I don't know who to trust anymore." Cranston's heart raced, but his face remained calm. This was a golden opportunity, but he had to tread carefully. "You don't have to tell me everything," he said gently. "But if you're in trouble, I can help." She laughed bitterly. "You don't even know me. Sometimes strangers are safer than friends," he replied. Carly studied him, her eyes searching his face for something. Sincerity, maybe, or just the absence of malice. Finally, she nodded. "Drive," she said, climbing back into the car. "I'll tell you everything." Carly's story. As they drove, Carly's story unfolded in halting fragments. She had worked for a private tech firm that specialized in data security. Or so she'd thought. 6 months ago, she discovered that her division was secretly developing software to monitor civilians, harvesting their personal data and using it to manipulate behavior. When she tried to expose the project, everything fell apart. Her emails were deleted, her access revoked, and her coworkers began treating her like a ghost. Within weeks, she was fired for insubordination. Then the real harassment began. Anonymous messages, strange cars idling outside her apartment, and vague threats disguised as friendly warnings. "I don't know what they want," Carly said, her voice trembling, "but they're not going to stop until I'm gone." Cranston's mind whirred with possibilities. Her paranoia was deliciously infectious, but more than that, it was useful. If someone really was watching her, it might bring attention to his own carefully hidden activities. And if she was just imagining it, she could still be a valuable pawn in his game. The intertwining. As their paths continued to cross, Carly unwittingly became both a threat and an opportunity for Cranston. Her fear and vulnerability made her easy to manipulate, but her intelligence and determination made her dangerous. She began confiding in him more, sharing details about the people she suspected were after her. But Carly wasn't as broken as Cranston had assumed. She began noticing things about him too. The way he always seemed to know where to find her, the peculiar questions he asked, the eerie calm in his demeanor. One night, she confronted him. "Why are you helping me?" she demanded, her eyes sharp and probing. Cranston smiled, the mask of friendliness slipping just slightly. "Because I know what it's like to have secrets," he said. Carly's breath caught, and for the first time, Cranston saw something in her eyes that wasn't fear. It was suspicion.